There is a crucial truth many men overlook about what truly captures and holds a woman's attention. It isn't about showcasing wealth. It isn't about listing achievements. It isn't even about being the most entertaining or charismatic person in the room. What distinguishes men who genuinely spark a woman's interest from those who are merely tolerated is far more subtle and far more powerful. It's the ability to make her feel deeply recognized rather than simply noticed. It's knowing how to ask questions that move beyond the repetitive conversations she's tired of having. It's understanding that attraction grows through creating an environment where she feels safe enough to reveal who she really is. Before we go deeper into this, I want you to pause for a second and really think about your last few conversations with a woman you were genuinely interested in. Not just what you said, but how the interaction felt. Did it feel alive, like something meaningful was unfolding? Or did it feel like you were both just following a script you didn't even realize you were reading from? Because most men don't fail due to lack of effort. They fail because they're playing a game on the surface, while the real connection is happening underneath, in a place they never reach. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If your conversations feel predictable, she already knows where it's going. And once a woman can predict you, she stops feeling you. And I want you to really sit with that for a moment, because this changes everything. So many men are exhausting themselves trying to say the perfect thing, trying to appear more impressive, more successful, more confident, while completely missing the deeper emotional experience a woman is actually responding to. Most women have had hundreds of surface-level conversations. They've heard the same compliments, the same questions, the same rehearsed charm. But what they rarely experience is a conversation that feels emotionally alive, a moment where they can drop the social mask and simply exist without performing. If you've ever felt invisible in your own relationships, if you've ever wondered why someone slowly lost interest, even though you were trying so hard, I want you to stay with me all the way through this video. And while you're listening, I want you to comment below with one word that describes how your conversations usually feel right now. Forced? Easy? Awkward? Exciting? Honest? I read those comments carefully, because understanding where you are emotionally is the first step toward changing the way people experience you. Sarah, host of What She Thinks YouTube channel, and what I'm about to share with you isn't about manipulation. It isn't about memorizing clever lines or pretending to be someone you're not. In fact, the men who rely on techniques without emotional awareness almost always create the opposite effect. Women can feel when someone is trying to manufacture connection instead of genuinely creating it. What we're talking about today goes deeper than attraction. We're talking about emotional resonance. We're talking about the psychological difference between being temporarily interesting and becoming emotionally memorable. Think about the people you've never forgotten in your own life. Chances are, it wasn't because they were perfect. It wasn't because they said all the right things. It was because they made you feel something authentic. Maybe they made you feel calm. Maybe they made you feel accepted. Maybe they listened in a way no one else ever had. Human beings are emotional memory machines. Neuroscience has shown repeatedly that emotionally charged experiences are stored more deeply in the brain than neutral ones. That means people rarely remember exact words, but they almost always remember emotional states. And women especially tend to experience attraction through emotional layering. What does that mean? It means attraction isn't always instant or purely visual. Sometimes it builds slowly through emotional safety, curiosity, anticipation, emotional contrast, and depth. A man can be objectively attractive and still leave no emotional impact whatsoever. Meanwhile, another man who simply understands how to make a woman feel emotionally present can stay on her mind for weeks. I once spoke to a woman who described 2 different dates she had within the same month. The first man was extremely accomplished. Expensive watch, luxury car, polished conversation, confident posture. On paper, he seemed perfect. But after the date, she felt strangely empty. She said the entire interaction felt like listening to a podcast about his life. He talked constantly. He impressed constantly. But emotionally, she never felt invited into the experience. Then she described another man she met a few weeks later. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't trying to dominate the interaction. But during dinner, he asked her one unexpected question. He asked, "What's something about your life right now that feels meaningful to you lately?" And when she answered, he didn't rush to speak. He listened carefully. He asked thoughtful follow-up questions. He paid attention to how she felt, not just what she said. And she told me something fascinating. She said, "I left that conversation feeling more like myself than I had in a long time." That sentence matters more than most people realize. Because when a woman feels more connected to herself in your presence, she naturally begins associating you with emotional comfort and emotional expansion. That's powerful psychology. You're no longer competing for attention. You're creating emotional gravity. And here's something important most men overlook. Women are often emotionally overstimulated in modern dating. Constant messaging, endless attention, social media validation, conversations that begin and disappear within days. So when someone finally slows down enough to create a real emotional experience, it stands out immediately. Not loudly, but deeply. Now let me ask you something difficult. When you talk to women, are you actually trying to know them? Or are you mostly trying to avoid rejection? Because those are very different energies. One creates connection, the other creates performance anxiety. Many men unconsciously enter conversations trying to manage outcomes. They want her to like them. They want things to go well. They want validation. So instead of becoming curious, they become strategic. They monitor themselves constantly. Did I sound confident? Did she laugh enough? Am I texting too much? And ironically, the more self-focused they become, the less emotionally available they appear. Women feel that disconnection instinctively. This is why some conversations feel flat, even when nothing technically goes wrong. The words may sound fine, but emotionally there's no depth underneath them. It's like eating food with no flavor. Nothing offensive, nothing memorable either. Now imagine something different. Imagine sitting across from a woman without needing to prove anything. Imagine being grounded enough to genuinely explore who she is instead of trying to control how she sees you. That energy alone changes the entire interaction. Your nervous system relaxes, your listening improves, your eye contact changes, your timing changes, and most importantly, she feels less pressure around you. One of the strongest emotional triggers in human psychology is the feeling of psychological safety. Research from attachment theory consistently shows that people open up emotionally when they feel accepted without immediate judgment or pressure. That's why the right question, asked with the right energy, can completely transform a conversation. Not because the question itself is magical, but because of the emotional permission it creates. And this is where the first question becomes incredibly powerful. You ask her, "What's something you strongly believed a few years ago that you don't believe anymore?" Now listen carefully because this is important. The power of this question is not intellectual, it's emotional. You're inviting her to reflect on transformation, on growth, on the evolution of her identity. Most conversations stay trapped in the present tense. Work, hobbies, weekend plans, surface details. But this question immediately shifts her inward. It invites introspection, and introspection naturally creates emotional depth. A woman might say she used to believe relationships required sacrificing herself to keep people happy. Or maybe she once believed success would automatically make her fulfilled. Or maybe she believed she always had to appear strong even when she was struggling internally. Now suddenly you're no longer discussing surface information. You're discussing emotional truths. And emotional truth is where intimacy begins. One of the biggest mistakes men make here is interrupting the emotional flow. The moment she says something meaningful, they immediately relate it back to themselves. "Oh yeah, I used to think that too." Or they rush to fix it. Or they change the subject because vulnerability makes them uncomfortable. Don't do that. Stay there. Let her words breathe. Silence is incredibly powerful when used correctly. In psychology, silence often acts as emotional space. It allows someone to process their own feelings more deeply. And when a woman feels you can hold silence without panic or discomfort, she unconsciously experiences you as emotionally grounded. That matters more than most men realize. Because emotional steadiness creates trust, and trust creates openness. I remember working with a man named Daniel who constantly struggled with dating despite being intelligent, successful, and socially capable. Every conversation he had felt transactional. Women described him as nice but forgettable. And when we examined his interactions closely, the pattern became obvious. He was constantly trying to impress instead of connect. So I gave him one challenge. During his next date, he was not allowed to talk about his achievements unless she specifically asked. Instead, his only goal was to become deeply curious about her inner world. At first, he resisted. He worried he would seem boring. But halfway through the date, something shifted. He asked her about a belief she had outgrown, And for the first time in years, he stopped trying to control the interaction. He simply listened. Later, he told me something surprising. He said, "For the first time, I wasn't thinking about whether she liked me. I was genuinely fascinated by who she was." And ironically, that was the exact moment she became deeply interested in him. Why? Because emotional presence is magnetic. Not performative confidence, not rehearsed charisma. Presence. The ability to fully meet someone in a moment without trying to manipulate the outcome. Now let's move into the second question, because this one opens an entirely different emotional door. You ask her, "When do you feel most like yourself?" This question bypasses social identity completely. It doesn't ask what she does for work. It doesn't ask how others see her. It asks who she becomes when she's emotionally aligned with herself. That distinction is huge. Most people spend enormous portions of their lives performing versions of themselves for family, coworkers, friends, or society. But very few people are asked about the moments where they feel emotionally authentic. Her answer may surprise you. Maybe she says she feels most like herself late at night, driving alone with music playing. Maybe she feels most alive when she's painting, traveling, reading, hiking, dancing, teaching, or simply sitting quietly with coffee before the world wakes up. And here's the deeper psychological layer. When she talks about these moments, she's reconnecting emotionally with parts of herself that often get buried beneath daily pressure. Your role is not to hijack that moment. Your role is to hold it carefully. You might gently ask, "What is it about those moments that feels so different?" Notice how soft that question is. No pressure, no performance, just curiosity. And when someone experiences that kind of emotional attention, they naturally begin feeling emotionally safe around you. This is also why emotionally intelligent conversations create stronger memory retention than surface conversations. Emotional engagement activates multiple areas of the brain simultaneously, especially regions associated with autobiographical memory and emotional processing. In simple terms, when someone feels emotionally present during a conversation, the interaction literally becomes more neurologically memorable. Now think about how rare that is today. Most conversations are fragmented by distraction. Phones buzzing, people half listening, everyone waiting for their turn to speak. So when someone finally feels fully heard, even briefly, it creates emotional contrast. And emotional contrast creates attraction. One woman once described this perfectly. She said, "I didn't even realize how disconnected most conversations were until I met someone who actually listened." That sentence says everything. Listening is no longer common. Deep listening is almost revolutionary. And here's something even more important. When you create this kind of space consistently, women start revealing things they don't usually reveal quickly. Not because you're forcing vulnerability, but because emotional safety naturally lowers defenses. That's the paradox most men misunderstand. You cannot force emotional intimacy. You can only create conditions where it naturally emerges. And those conditions are built through curiosity, patience, emotional steadiness, and genuine attention. Not performance, not pressure, not trying too hard. Now I want you to reflect honestly for a moment. How often do your conversations actually slow down enough for emotional depth to appear? Or are you rushing unconsciously because silence makes you nervous? Because in the next part, we're going to go deeper into the remaining questions, including the ones that unlock hidden desires, reveal emotional patterns, expose relationship dynamics, and create emotional tension in a way most people never experience naturally. And once you understand the psychology behind those moments, you'll stop chasing connection and start creating it effortlessly. Now, here's where things begin to deepen in a way most people never experience in modern dating. Because once a woman feels emotionally safe enough to open up, the conversation stops being about exchanging information and starts becoming about emotional discovery. And that shift changes everything. At this point, she's no longer deciding whether you're simply attractive on the surface. She's deciding whether being around you feels emotionally different from being around everyone else. And that's the real question most women are unconsciously asking during every interaction. How do I feel when I'm with this person? Not how impressive he is, not how polished he sounds, how he makes her feel internally. Does she feel tense or relaxed, guarded or open, drained or energized, evaluated or understood? Because emotional experiences create emotional memory, and emotional memory is what keeps someone thinking about you long after the conversation ends. This is where the third question becomes incredibly powerful. You ask her, if nothing held you back, no fear, no money concerns, no judgment, what would you be doing right now? And the reason this question works so deeply is because it temporarily removes limitation from her identity. Most people spend years editing themselves before they speak. They minimize desires, they suppress dreams, they train themselves to sound practical instead of honest. But this question interrupts that pattern. Suddenly, she has permission to imagine freely. And when people enter that emotional space, something fascinating happens psychologically. Their energy changes, their voice changes, their posture changes. You can actually watch someone reconnect with a hidden part of themselves in real time. She might tell you she wants to move somewhere completely different and start over. Maybe she secretly wants to write a book, start a business, travel alone for a year, become an artist, leave a career that no longer fulfills her, build a quieter life, build a bigger life. And in that moment, she's no longer talking about logistics. She's talking about longing. That matters because longing is deeply emotional territory. Now here's where most men unintentionally destroy the moment. The second she reveals something vulnerable or aspirational, they jump into fixing mode. You should do it. You just need confidence. Why don't you start now? But emotional connection is not built by immediately solving someone's feelings. It's built by understanding them first. So instead of rushing toward solutions, stay emotionally present. You might softly ask, what do you think stops you the most? Or, how do you think your life would feel if you actually did that? Do you see the difference? You're not redirecting her emotional process. You're helping her explore it more deeply. And this is where conversations become unforgettable, because most people are not emotionally witnessed in daily life. They're interrupted, corrected, redirected, judged, advised. But when someone feels emotionally explored instead of emotionally managed, they feel profoundly understood. That's rare, and rarity creates value. I remember hearing a woman describe a conversation she had years earlier with someone she never even dated seriously. Yet she still remembered him vividly. Why? Because one night he asked her what kind of life she secretly wanted, but had never admitted out loud. She talked for almost an hour. And afterward, she said she felt strangely emotional because she realized no one had ever asked her that before. Think about that. One meaningful conversation can create emotional impact that lasts years. Not because of manipulation, because of emotional presence. Now let's move into the fourth question, because this one reveals something even deeper. You ask her, what kind of connection do you believe you truly deserve? This question reaches directly into self-worth, attachment patterns, emotional expectations, and relationship history all at once. And depending on her emotional awareness, her response may come quickly or very slowly. Some women immediately describe emotional safety, consistency, honesty, affection, mutual respect, emotional maturity. Others hesitate. And sometimes hesitation itself reveals something important. Because many people have spent so long accepting emotionally inconsistent relationships that they've never fully defined what healthy love actually feels like. That's more common than most people realize. Psychologists often talk about attachment conditioning. In simple terms, people frequently normalize the emotional environments they repeatedly experience. If someone grew up around inconsistency, emotional distance, criticism, unpredictability, or abandonment, they may unconsciously tolerate unhealthy dynamics in adulthood because those patterns feel emotionally familiar. So when you ask a woman what kind of connection she truly believes she deserves, you're not just asking about dating, you're asking about her emotional blueprint. And if she trusts you enough to answer honestly, listen carefully. Not to analyze her, not to judge her, to understand her. Maybe she admits she's tired of relationships where she always carries the emotional weight. Maybe she says she wants peace more than excitement now. Maybe she wants someone emotionally available. Maybe she wants to stop feeling lonely inside relationships. And here's what matters most. Don't rush past these moments. Acknowledge them gently. Something as simple as, "That makes a lot of sense," can feel incredibly validating when it's genuine. Validation is powerful because it reduces emotional isolation. One of the deepest human fears is the fear of not being understood emotionally. So when someone feels emotionally recognized without being criticized or dismissed, trust naturally grows. And trust is what allows attraction to deepen sustainably. Not intensity, not games, trust. Now, the fifth question moves even deeper into vulnerability. You ask her, what's something you wish people understood about you, but they usually don't? This question often creates a visible emotional shift because it touches identity wounds people quietly carry for years. She might tell you people assume she's emotionally cold when she's actually just careful. Maybe people think she's confident when internally she battles anxiety constantly. Maybe she feels misunderstood by her family. Maybe she feels pressure to always appear strong. Maybe she's exhausted from being emotionally available for everyone else while receiving very little in return. And in moments like this, your emotional presence matters far more than your words. This is where emotionally immature men often panic. They joke too quickly, change the subject, minimize the feeling, or make everything about themselves. But emotionally intelligent presence sounds different. It sounds calm, grounded, attentive. You don't need to deliver a perfect response. You just need to stay emotionally available. Something simple like, I can understand why that would feel heavy sometimes, can create more connection than an elaborate speech. Why? Because emotionally attuned responses make people feel emotionally safe, and emotional safety is one of the strongest foundations of lasting attraction. Now, I want to pause here and say something extremely important. None of this works if your intention is fake. Women are incredibly perceptive emotionally. They may not always consciously explain why something feels off, but they often sense when someone is using emotional depth strategically rather than authentically. And the body reveals intention constantly. Your tone, your timing, your eye contact, your patience, your reactions. People can feel when curiosity is genuine and when it's performative. That's why the goal is never to use these questions. The goal is to become the kind of person who genuinely values emotional depth. Because when emotional intelligence becomes natural to you, connection becomes natural too. Now let's move into the sixth question, because this one reveals growth, wisdom, and emotional evolution all at once. You ask her, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be? This question is emotionally powerful because it naturally pulls someone into reflection without forcing vulnerability artificially. And what people say here often reveals their deepest emotional lessons. She might say she would tell her younger self not to abandon herself trying to keep others happy. Maybe she'd say not to stay too long in relationships that hurt her. Maybe she'd tell herself to trust her intuition more, to stop shrinking herself, to stop chasing validation, to stop being afraid of disappointing people. Notice something important here. People reveal their emotional scars indirectly through wisdom. That's why reflective questions create such deep connection. They allow vulnerability without emotional pressure. And again, your role is not to dominate the moment. It's to hold it carefully. One woman once became emotional answering this question because she realized how harshly she had treated herself throughout most of her 20s. She admitted she had spent years believing her value depended entirely on how useful she was to other people. Now imagine how emotionally intimate that realization is. And imagine the level of trust required to say it out loud. That's why these conversations become memorable, because they create moments of emotional honesty most people rarely experience. Now at this point, if you've listened well, if you've stayed grounded, if you haven't rushed or performed or forced anything, she already feels something different around you. And here's the irony. The less desperately you try to create attraction, the more naturally attraction tends to emerge. Because desperation creates pressure. Presence creates connection. Now, before we move into the final question, I want you to think about your own patterns for a second. How often are you truly listening in conversations instead of mentally preparing your next response? How often are you allowing silence to breathe instead of rushing to fill it? How often are you trying to impress instead of understand? Because these distinctions matter more than most people realize. Now we arrive at the final question, and in many ways, this one reveals the deepest layer of all. You ask her, what does freedom mean to you personally? This question is powerful because freedom is deeply tied to identity, emotional needs, values, and hidden motivations. Everyone wants freedom, but freedom means radically different things to different people. For one woman, freedom may mean emotional peace. For another, independence. For another, creative expression. For another, safety. For another, the ability to fully be herself without fear of rejection. And when she begins describing freedom, she's unconsciously revealing the emotional environment she's trying to build in her life. Listen carefully to that, because this is where you begin understanding someone beyond attraction. You begin understanding what truly matters to them emotionally. Maybe she says freedom means not needing constant validation anymore. Maybe she says freedom means waking up without anxiety. Maybe it means financial independence. Maybe it means finding relationships where she doesn't feel controlled emotionally. And if you stay curious instead of reactive, the conversation naturally deepens further. You might ask softly, "Do you feel close to that kind of freedom right now?" That question alone can open an entirely new emotional layer. And this is the deeper lesson underneath everything we've discussed today. The goal of meaningful conversation is not information gathering, it's emotional exploration. You're not interviewing her. You're creating an emotional environment where authenticity becomes possible. That's what creates real connection. Now here's where many men finally begin understanding what attraction actually is. Attraction is not just chemistry, it's emotional association. A woman becomes drawn toward people who consistently make her feel emotionally alive, emotionally safe, emotionally expanded, emotionally understood. That's why some people stay in your mind long after they leave your life. Not because of what they had, because of how you felt around them. And I want you to notice something else. Everything we discussed today also changes you. When you stop performing and start genuinely connecting, your own anxiety decreases too. You stop obsessing over outcomes, you stop monitoring every word. You become more relaxed because you're no longer trying to win approval constantly. That's real confidence, not loud confidence. Not performative confidence, grounded confidence, the kind that comes from emotional self-security. And women feel that immediately. One of the most attractive qualities any person can have is emotional steadiness, the ability to stay calm, attentive, and present without trying to dominate or control every interaction. That energy feels rare today because so many people communicate from nervousness, distraction, insecurity, or emotional unavailability. But when someone feels emotionally regulated, people naturally relax around them. Now let's talk briefly about silence, because this matters more than most people think. Silence is not the enemy of connection. Fear of silence is. Most people rush to fill quiet moments because silence exposes emotional tension. But when you become comfortable with pauses, conversations begin breathing naturally. A thoughtful silence after someone shares something meaningful can actually deepen intimacy more than words can. Because silence communicates presence. It says, "I'm here with you. I'm listening. I'm not rushing away from this moment." That's emotionally powerful. Now I want to leave you with something practical you can begin applying immediately.